All right, my guest today is Sharma Lachu, the co-founder of Accendo. For those of you who don't know, Accendo is a talent intelligence platform company that helps organizations revolutionize how to attract, assess, align, develop, and retain top talent, both inside and outside of the company. Thank you very much for being here today, Sharma.
Kevin, thank you very much. I've heard so much about you. I've had so many things spoken about you. So I'm very happy to be here, part of this chat.
I very much appreciate the kind words, Sharma. So I do want to know because it leaves a lot to kind of unpack of that kind of intro statement of who Accendo is. But before we get into that, I'm just kind of curious on how you started off on your entrepreneurial journey and how that linked up to Accendo as well.
So I think maybe let me start with my childhood a little bit, and perhaps that will give a little bit of context as to who Sharma is, where Sharma's come from, right? As you reached out to have this session, I was just trying to think back a little bit, and I remember in another podcast I had spoken about the journeys or the moments in time where I've learned certain things. There's a theory out there that speaks about pivotal moments in your life that has very little to do with work, right? So between the ages of about 5 to 21, you go through 8 to 10 things in life that really shape who you are as a person. And I forget the specific theory. I'll find it out and come back to you on that. But as I was going through these processes, right, 3, 4 things came to mind. And perhaps let me set the scene there a little bit. Right? So you speak about the entrepreneurial spirit and where that came from. I think the very first entrepreneurial endeavor I had was selling. I was, I think, 10. Year 4, right? About 10, 11 years old. And I noticed my neighbor was selling, in Malaysia, we've got this banana chips, right? Crepe. So I'm from Kuantan. I'm from the east coast of Malaysia, and my neighbor was doing this as a side hustle. And I noticed, a lot of these aunties around the neighborhood would come in and buy these big bags of these banana chips. And I reached out to her. I went to her house one day and said, "Hey, can you do me small packets so I could take it to to school and try and sell it at school?" Right. So she would sell it for $2 in and around the neighborhood. I asked her to do me 20 cents packets so I could take it to school and sell it. And the buzz I got from that, I thought was really, really interesting. So that was actually my first entrepreneurial endeavor, right? One thing I realized at that point is the ability to identify an opportunity is going to be interesting, right? So I thrive in that process. The second part about Sharma is, I come from a sports background. I played football very, very seriously for school up to junior state level, right?
Okay.
And this is maybe not the nicest thing to hear, but throughout that time, I'd always been told about, sorry, not the right skin color, sorry, not the right race, all that kind of stuff, right? Now, you can choose to play victim and say, "Oh, look, so sorry for Sharma," but that's not what happened, right? So I very early on had realized that, okay, if this is the case, and again, this is not unique to Malaysia, yeah. So I've played football in Australia. I've played. All this happens everywhere, right? But I very early on realized that for me not to be ignored, I cannot then be just this much better than the next person. I need to be this much better than the next person, right? So taking away the victimization of what's happened and seeing how to then move on from that process. I think if you take these 2 things about Sharma, you will understand the journey a lot better, right? So then my career started off in Sydney. I had the opportunity to work for a brilliant American company called Provisor. Like every middle-class Malaysian family, my parents also sent me overseas to go and study. I also had the opportunity to work there. long story short, again, the ability to look at an opportunity and say, hey, here's something to it, right? I then went back to the founders of that business and say, you know, I do some things for y'all already. Would it be okay for y'all if I go back to Asia and set this up as my business, but use some of your products? So that was the impetus for what was the beginning of the Accendo journey. Right? At that point, we were called Arcane Solutions. Terrible name.
It's a bit arcane.
Everyone associated arcane with arcade, right?
Yeah.
Here were three young boys. We thought it was really cool to have the name arcade because it was mysterious and knowledge known by very few. And it didn't work out. Anyway, so Arcane Solutions at that point was predominantly reselling psychometrics assessment. So I've always been in the space of talent or people measurement, right? Then we were doing that a little bit, and then clients started, growing. And then we recognized that, just selling one part of the solution wasn't cutting it for them, right? So we'd sell an assessment, and the clients would use it, they love it, but it didn't solve a problem for them. It was a cog in the wheel.
Yep.
So then we started the second iteration of the business, which was a custom dev house, right? So we said, hey, here are products that we sell, but it seems like you need something before and something after. Let's help you build these things out. So we started building things like applicant tracking systems. We started building performance management systems, and that was going relatively well. Now, bear in mind that I'm not a technologist. Neither are my co-founders.
Okay.
So, getting into this was a huge learning for us, right? So I had to go on, take courses and making sure the guys that we were hiring was not, over estimating things for us or underestimating for us.
You outsourced it.
No, we never outsourced it, right? So I think we were paranoid about the quality control. So we always had somebody come in and do the work, but just to make sure no one bullshitting you through that process. You've got at least up your game a little bit, right?
Sure.
And then something really struck hard for us. Now, the work we typically do up to this point, and this was, we started off in 2007, 2008, around that, and we were doing this up to 2017, right? So a good 9-10 years already. If you think about Accendo, I always say, think about it in a pyramid. The very bottom of the pyramid, the Simon Sinek journey, right? The why of what we do, right? And to me, the why of what we do really is about giving people the opportunity to be the best versions of themselves at work. And why, to me, that is important is because there's more than enough data out there to show families who are unhappy at work produce kids who are about 30% more likely to be bullies, right? And just that statistic as a parent scares the living daylight out of me, right? So how do you make sure you optimize work for people, right? And so that meant to us, right people, right place, right time. Now, everyone from recruitment companies to training companies say this, right? So then we said, okay, if that's the why, how are we going to achieve this? So then we looked at only trying to solve for two things. Now, I spoke to you a little bit about my background, so you will see that the me pulling from history a little bit. The first thing that we look to solve for is managing for implicit bias.
Okay.
Right? We all have implicit bias.
Sure.
Right? It's our fight or flight mechanism.
There's a mental efficiency around having preconceived notions.
Exactly, right? But when you don't recognize that you have it and you start making decisions against that process, then it becomes very inefficient. And so how do we manage for it? So that's why we're very careful not to use the word eliminate implicit bias, because we don't want to eliminate it. We want to manage it.
Yep.
Second thing is something that I'd like to say Accendo is championing, only because I've not heard of anyone else speak about this. And I speak about the management of the invisible leakage. Right? You get PwCs and Deloittes of the world going around doing audits for visible leakage, right? When you leave the room, you don't switch off the light. For a big organization that equates to $300,000, worth of electricity bill, things like that, right? You steal the company, what happens? Stationery, all that kind of stuff. The invisible leakage, as defined by Accendo, is the delta between where someone ought to be when they have a job against where they typically are for whatever reason, right? Now, the malicious reason, are things like, implicit bias, you're my friend, so I'm giving it to you, all this kind of stuff. The less malicious reasons is just lack of talent, or I just don't understand what the role requires, right? So it's not always malicious, the gap. Sometimes it's an innocent mistake, right? Because I don't have the right information pieces in front of me, I don't make the right decisions. So that's the two problems we try and solve, and that's all. We don't pretend to try and do anything else, right?
Okay.
So initially, the hypothesis was these are the same things that we do. When we first started, we were selling psychometrics, and that's what we used to do. In our second iteration, we were selling custom dev work. And then this one moment happened. So sorry for going a little bit all over the place.
No.
Just to give the background and context. So as we were doing this work for companies, and typically we do work for large enterprises, right? And I won't mention the company name or the region, but we do work in Southeast Asia, right? So it's around here. Sorry, not the region. I won't mention the country or the company name. So we were doing this work, and part of the work is to help the client identify a CFO successor.
Okay.
And we do the traditional model of going in, having done the assessments, having done the interviews, completed all of that process. We are now at the board meeting presenting the outcome.
Right. So you yourself are interviewing the candidates.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the traditional model, right? So
sure. The high touch, the consulting model of HR recruiting.
And we were doing all of this, and then mind you, we were already doing relatively well at that point, right? So we were very comfortable as a business. So huge client, tens of billions of US dollar kind of revenue business, right? So you would think the level of sophistication is extremely high. And for everything else, it is, right? And we finished the 3-hour presentation. We're now getting decisions. So 9% board, and I'm going one by one, right? So yay, nay. I'm getting yays all over. I reach person number 7. Person number 7 says yay. And just before we go to person number 8, and person number 9 is the executive chair, right? Just before person number 8 answers, executive chair, in passing, just says one comment. Don't you think something's not right with this person? He wears pink all the time. That's all he says, right? He has no evidence of lack of performance. He has no evidence of not being able to hold the job well. Nothing. He just says, "Don't." It's so
his style of dress
that I can remember word for word, right? Don't you think something's not right with this person? He wears pink all the time. And one by one, you see the direct their decision, right?
Can I change my vote now?
Right? And it wasn't as obvious as that, right? But they were going, actually, if you think about this, do you remember this time when he didn't do this? And the other person going, yeah, actually, you're right. Now that you say, I think about this. Like, where was this during deliberation?
Yeah.
And just like that. And this person didn't get the job, right? Because of a comment one person made. Now, I'm not talking about whether the chairman is right. That's not the point.
Sure.
But the comment one person made impacted a person's ability to get a job, right? And that's when it hit us really hard, right? Because as a consulting firm, we do work for maybe 8-9 companies a year, right? And this typically are big value tickets, right? So
sure, you're getting success fee presumably on that hire being completed. So if it doesn't happen, you're like, oh man.
No. I mean, that wasn't. No. We don't get on the success of that hire. So it's a project anyway, right? So they're typically high value anyway because we're doing at board levels.
Sure.
But what I meant to say was, we were already very comfortable, right? Because 10 projects a year at this.
Okay, yeah.
We're very good already. But this hit us really hard because we said, look, if we are serious about our hypothesis, giving people the opportunity to be the best versions of themselves at work, if we're serious about how we do it, right? Managing for implicit bias and managing for invisible leakage, we are not really impacting that many companies by doing it this way. right? And that was, the moment we sat down and said, let's repaint this tapestry, right? Well, what is the next 10 years going to look like for us? Because if we're going to now start scaling, then, does that mean we need to hire 20 times more people? That's not an efficient way to scale. And this really irritated us, right?
Okay.
So, that means we're not really having an impact, right?
Yeah.
So let's take a step back. Look at what the next 10 years is going to be. Look at our hypothesis again. Is it still valid? Do people still care about these things, right? So look, our hypothesis still makes sense. The way we want to do it still makes sense. The mode of transaction for us today doesn't make sense, right? So we said, okay, can we take all of our learning over the last 10 years and implement it into some sort of system that we built? 2018, we started this journey. And we had a really, really wonderful partner client. Axiata came on board. So we presented this vision.
Okay.
And Axiata was, really excited by it. And, at that time, Tan Sri Jamal was the executive chairman and CEO. He is a statistician and a mathematician, right? So, he got really excited by this idea of really understanding how data can be used in identifying talent mobility, career pathing. So we said, working with Axiata as a project client, let's see how we can use the cases within the organization to drive for an outcome.
So did they come in as financial support? Because I know they used to operate a couple of entities that would provide financial support, come in as a financial sponsor essentially, and also do internal projects with you. Or was it primarily on the project base of being able to have somebody to kind of test out this new hypothesis on?
Correct. They paid for it, of course.
Sure.
But no, there was no equity swap. There was nothing of that sort, right? So they looked at this as a way to solve some of their key problems. And here was a company that was willing to experiment a different way of doing things. So the first thing I want to say, without somebody like Axiata, and I think that's what's important for a startup ecosystem.
Yeah.
Able to have somebody like that. Because mind you, we pitched this to about 15 other companies prior to going to Axiata, right? And everyone said, "Oh, Sharma, we really love your hypothesis. Who else has done this?" And I'm like, "No, we're talking to you first." They're like, "Oh, go and sell it to somebody else, then we'll come on board."
Yeah,
right?
there's a little bit more of a follower aspect than a leader aspect. You really need a couple of the corporates that are a bit more forward-thinking, innovative, and willing to try out something new. Right. And let's be honest, these corporates are big. The value at risk of paying for a project like this is pretty small, comparatively speaking.
Exactly, right? So look, a huge thank you to Axiata, and I hope more and more get on this bandwagon of testing hypothesis, right?
Yeah.
If you take the scientific approach of experimentation, not everything is going to work, but if you don't experiment, you're never going to find out.
Exactly.
And Axiata was willing to do that, right? So that was brilliant. And with Axiata, what we got was, a Southeast Asia perspective, right? So we had to go to Nepal and figure out how to solve a people problem there. We had to go to Indonesia and figure out how to solve a people problem there. And he had companies that had 500 people. He had companies that had 3,000 people. It was beautiful. It was a mess for us because we were learning how to do this, but it was a beautiful mess, right? But then we said, look, now we understand if we can solve problem at the highest level, then we can cascade and simplify the use cases. So that's how Talent Pulse came about. So Talent Pulse is this talent intelligence platform that pretty much does two very simple things, right? Being able to diagnose the individual. And once I diagnose the individual, I then design what good is supposed to look like. Internally, we have a saying, skills as the future currency for exchange. We no longer care about job roles. Nobody cares about job roles anymore. Job roles evolve and change so much. But the underlying skills kind of move around different jobs, right? So skills is the future currency for exchange. So if you take the skills and you're able to diagnose the individual and then overlay these two things, you're able to provide a command center for the individual, for the business, and for the leaders of the organization to understand how to maneuver that business. So that is essentially what we do, and that is our journey so far.
And so when you're talking about that, does it still sit primarily on the recruitment side, or are you also going past that to ongoing talent management?
So we actually, our solution predominantly is for internal talent. We always work with the current team that's already within the organization. It extends to recruitment. So we are actually the other way around, right? So we start with internal talent, design what good is supposed to be, and then pass that across to the recruitment team to make sure the people they start bringing into the organization also fit the same point of view.
Okay. So let me ask on the component of understanding the individual. So you talked about the background of selling psychometric and these sort of tools for analysis. Are you guys actually creating those at that point in time? And with the current product, how do you address, because when we talk about Nepal versus Indonesia versus these different countries, there's a lot of nuance from one place to another. So standardizing psychometrics exams is also a bit of a challenge, because oftentimes there's cultural differences that can kind of muddy the waters of some of these different questions. And is the translation accurate in order to put it into an individual's local language? If you're doing it in English, well, it's a second language. Is there interpretation? How do you guys unpack that? And do you have like statisticians and behavioral psychologists on staff that help you kind of work through that?
Yeah, thank you. Brilliant question. I hope more and more clients ask this kind of questions because this is a very pointed question, right? As opposed to what's your price? So look, I love the question. So first things first, we are essentially a behavioral psychology based technology company.
Yeah.
So everything we do is about the behavioral psychology elements, right? So to answer your question, we do a couple of things. So I often say I take on the Tesla model and the Luxottica model, right? So the idea of the Luxottica model is, there's a marketplace. I bring everything in. So whether it be Sunglass Hut or somewhere else, I build I move your merch, right? Sure. For those of y'all who don't know who Luxottica is, they own. If you wear glasses, they probably own your glasses, right? Yeah. So I think last check was about 92% of the spectacles market is owned by Luxottica.
Yeah.
It's a lovely story. Anyway, then there's the Tesla point of view, right? Where something can be commoditized, then we develop our own, right? So the way we look at something is where there is high IP, we don't try and replicate, right? So our aim, and again, I told you I used to be in the psychometric space, right? And I came from the sales side of things. Sure. Now, whether it be in Australia or here, anyone you speak to in this field will tell you they're the best, they're the biggest, they're world's number one. To a point, I used to almost go out and say, buy my product, I can solve world hunger and cure cancer. Right? So it's always a function of salesmanship, right? So now Sharma turns up, he does a nice song and dance. Suddenly this product is really good. Kevin turns up, throws on a little bit more of an accent, and says, hi, I'm Dr. Kevin, and suddenly his product is better, right? Especially in Southeast Asia, the understanding or the maturity in buying psychometrics is still very, very nascent, right? And many of us thrive on that process, right? Because it's a function of salesmanship. So when we decided we wanted to do this, we decided that we were not going to participate in this salesmanship anymore, right? It is very important that if we believe in our hypothesis, that we now become the curator of what we believe are some of the biggest, best tools available globally. Right? So what we did is we developed an assessment marketplace. So as of today, we've got about 1,600 different tests from 11 different tool providers across the world, right? And our team, so you said you have statisticians, do you have psychologists? The team internally who are of these people go in and validate these claims. So when company A comes out and says, hey, look at my test, it can do this, our occupational psychologists actually go in and validate for this process. If it does, then we integrate it into our system, because there's a lot of salesmanship going on out there. There's a lot of people claiming a lot of things that are not very true, right? Sure. So we want to make sure that the tools on the platform are secure, are valid, and are reliable, right? Because people are using this to make decisions about other people.
Sure, sure. And when you are working with a client, are you doing like a Frankenstein's monster sort of aspect where you're taking a few of these different service providers, bundling them up based upon the specific needs case that they have, or how is it?
So initially, when we launched, yes, that was the case. We are productizing it more and more, that we are enabling the customer to go in and say, hey, look, this is a problem. How do I solve this problem? And then the system automatically kind of uses decision tree to help you cut through that pain. So you almost like, you know, a kid in an arcade. You've gotten all your tokens. You've got all the games now. You decide what is more important for you and where you want to spend your tokens, right?
Yeah.
But coming back to your technical part, right, about the different countries, different nuances,
Sure.
and things, that's where the decisions come to play, right? And, you know, being able to break it down within country, within function, within levels is very, very important for us. So, you know, depending on the country, depending on the company, sometimes somebody like Axiata says, look, we are across the region, right? So a director within our company should be able to move anywhere, right? So I want a point of view where it's across Asia, right? But the Nepal head of HR may say, hey, look, I'm trying to figure out whether this person can move vertically. Can you now segment the data just by country, right? So being able to help them figure all this out is equally important, right? So the kind of data segregation that happens within the system, how you simplify that for usage within the organization is also very, very important.
Okay. And so you've transitioned into this space, and I want to touch on the salesmanship aspect, because I think a common thing with most SaaS providers, most people that are kind of selling into enterprise in Southeast Asia, where, let's be honest, digitalization is relatively low. It's very new conceptually. You reference that with Axiata versus some of the other folks that were out there. When you're now like getting ready to go out to market, you know, tell me a little bit about how you started getting the awareness and the interest built among additional clients. You had this existing base already because you were operating under more of a consulting model. But then when you transition, now you kind of build up the awareness and interest around a new product. Tell me about how you actually got out there, the marketing steps, the sales steps. How did you do it?
Sure. I think when we first launched, again, huge learnings for us, right? We were overly, I won't say cocky. We were overly excited. You know, first client, Axiata, right? Which then automatically meant to us that, you know, every other big enterprise organization was going to do this. We launched in June of 2019.
Okay.
March 2020, everything shut. And that was a huge
timing.
Huge learning for us, right?
Yeah.
Painful. So again, not everything is roses, right?
Sure.
But what was really exciting for us is, you know, when we built, and I'll be honest about this, right? When we built the product, a lot of the building revolved around a bullish market, right? So big talent mobility, career pathing, I want to enable that. How do I drive this? What we realized is, you know, clients were creative enough to look at the solution and say, look, in a bearish market, how can we use something like this? Right? And they helped us drive that component. So I don't want to take credit for something I didn't do. But, you know, the 2 years during COVID, a lot of the work revolved around optimization, efficiency creation, and so on, right? And that was designed by the clients themselves.
Okay.
And I think that helped a lot, even in our fundraising, because now you're able to show a product that is almost recession-proof, right?
Right. And validated by the customer, since they help steer. Yeah.
So there's a bull market use case and there's a bear market use case. And that was really interesting for us. As we came out, so 2021 was really interesting for us, correct? As we came out of 2020, everyone stopped panicking and realized, you know, things have to keep moving on. We felt our ducks were now aligned, right? So the marketing push then, we recognize some of the key traits that were important for us, right? So we said, look, if you're talking about talent, it is then important to understand the level of maturity of the organization, right? So what is the CEO agenda? That was the first thing we looked at, right? And that's a very difficult piece of information to go and get. Right? So the two key things that we looked at, what is the CEO's agenda? And the second part is, who does the CHRO report into? So if the CHRO reports into the COO, whilst we'd love them to be a client, we think now is not the time, right? Because we want to look at CHROs who report directly to the CEO first. That's a proxy to us of the importance of people in the organization, right? So coming back to your question about, you've been around, so how do you get clients? We deliberately decided that the first 10 customers we were going to get were not going to be customers we had previously. Because it's very easy to go and say, hey guys, you know us for the last 4 or 5 years, we've built something new, come on board.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, right. So we did to test the hypothesis. And I guess this is the product market fit testing time, right?
Okay.
To test that hypothesis, we went to new customers, right? And we ran a whole, so our marketing is pretty much on HubSpot, right? So we run a full lead generation, MQL, SQL journey.
Yep.
A typical SaaS demand generation process.
Yeah, right?
And we wanted to see if we could get people interested and excited about this process. So the first 10 new customers, enterprise customers, were new customers, right? Then we started diving deeper into them, getting the use cases and understanding, hey, okay, this is real. Then we went back to our old customers and said, hey, we've got a new product. Would you be interested? So that was pretty much the journey for the first 2 years. I think 23 onwards is going to be, we are still relatively Malaysia heavy, but we do work in Indonesia, Singapore, India, and Turkey.
Yeah.
So India and Turkey is purely through partnerships. And we are very cognizant that, as a SaaS product, we cannot be the only source of, badge collection, customer acquisition, right? So we're looking at how to build strong partnerships across the region first, and then figuring out how to grow global through that process. So the aspiration is global. You say you've been in Malaysia long enough. There's a term in Malaysia called jaguh kampung. I despise that term. I hate it.
Which is basically like national champion. There's a default assumption that Malaysia doesn't build for the world; it builds just for Malaysia, which is an entirely untrue, but it's a very prevalent, unfortunately.
Right. So and there's many stories of how VCs have looked at us and said, "Oh, really? You're a brilliant business, but if you were based somewhere else, won't mention country names, I'd give you a higher valuation." Right. And so on and so forth. I'm going, no, Malaysia, I'm based here. All right.
Yeah. It's true. A lot of people call it the Malaysia discount, and it's partly because of the same reputation of it builds as national champions, not global players. So if the assumption is that your TAM is capped, and so your maximum opportunity, so it ends up driving that, which is a very unfortunate thing that we need to work hard to break. Hopefully more of these podcasts ends up in the ears of those sorts of folks, so that we can demonstrate that we have businesses that are clearly not fitting that mold.
Correct. But yeah, so aspiration is global, but we are very cautious. I'm trying to be as calculated as possible. Money is now not as cheap as it used to be.
Definitely.
So we want to be careful how we do this as well.
Okay. And on the strategy, in order to fill the top of funnel, I mean, it's one thing to kind of run them through the process of the MQL and the SQL and all of that, but when you're trying to fill that top of funnel, what are your main lead generation sources? Is it kind of the old fashioned, let's call up some corporates because we're doing enterprise, maybe it's a little bit of the bigger enterprise section, or is there like an inbound lead channel that you heavily focus on as well?
Yep. So there is an inbound lead section that, funnily enough, is generating a lot of interest for us in the Middle East.
Okay.
Right. So Indonesia, India, Middle East is where our inbound is really exciting.
Okay.
not done anything special for these countries. No special SEO.
It just so happens that that's who's
really looking for these things, right?
Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But also the traditional, picking up the phone. But also, I think we have the luxury of being in the business for 15 years.
Okay.
Right. So it's not a new business coming into market. Somebody's not heard of you. We're not trying something new. People know us. What is interesting now is we're trying to break this in new countries, right? So in Singapore, people have not really heard of Accendo. In Indonesia, no one's really heard of Accendo. India, Turkey, Middle East, no one's heard of Accendo. So now being able to replicate the growth that we've had in Malaysia in these countries is a really exciting point to hypothesis evidence, right?
Yeah.
You're now saying, look, the product's working, there is product market fit, and we're now growing through this journey.
Yeah. Basically trying to take the playbook that you used here in Malaysia, where you're quite heavy on, and seeing how you copy paste that into a new geography.
With tweaks, of course.
Yeah. Some sort of Pareto principle, 80-20 style thing, where there's obviously going to be some nuance to an individual market. Hopefully as little as possible, because every adjustment is a cost, in fact.
So, well, what we've actually realized, the tweaking is not with the product. The tweaking is with the messaging.
Within the messaging, yeah. So it's more the go-to-market motion as opposed to the product market fit.
Yeah, or at least that's our experience. Right? I don't think that's the same with everyone else.
Yeah,
that's what we're seeing. Right. So yes, in Turkey, say for example, we've had to translate it to Turkish, but that's not as difficult as changing the system. Right? India is a different market segment that we're working with, things like that. So it's really the messaging that we found the tweaking needs to happen in.
Yeah. Do you find I have to ask this part, because you're kind of built around behavioral psychology. Do you run any sort of behavioral psychology analytics around the individuals that would be in the buyer seat at the organizations that you're targeting?
We do. I shall not say too much, but we do. I mean, technically, we are a behavioral psychology firm, right? So if we don't figure that out, then what's the use of being a behavioral psychology firm?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that's a bit of salesmanship. Any good salesman does a little bit of research on who they're talking to, so that they can say the right thing, mention the right interests, and be able to convert. It's just a matter of how sophisticated in that are you getting.
Correct.
Very cool. Very cool.
I'll give some away, right? Really, the things we look for is genuine concern, right?
Yeah.
And that translates to conscientiousness, and in the ability to want to actually do something good, right? Because there are many people who, they call them, doing or LinkedIn leaders. Right? They're always on LinkedIn. They're always doing something. They're always doing something, but nothing much happens. And then there are those who, yes, while do all of that, actually do some really interesting work, right? So we look for that genuine concern and try and figure how we connect that to conscientiousness, and that leads to better closure for us. Okay. I'll give you one.
Yeah. Do you find that as you look at other markets, that the ideal customer persona, whether it's in size of organization, the industry vertical, is it pretty consistent based upon what you're seeing currently, or does that also shift based upon geography?
For us, I think there is one constant. Right, and that constant is industries that are most disrupted by digitization.
Okay.
And typically they sit within the telco and the banking space.
Okay.
Right? Or financial institutions, not just banking. Right? So typically they sit within the telco and the financial institution space. These are the ones that are very impacted by digitization. In fact, I have an article somewhere floating on the internet that talks about, are you a contender or a pretender of the digital economy, right? So that's where we see the one constant. But other than that, of course, each country will have its own small nuances. But the biggest is that who gets disrupted by digitization the most.
Okay. Let me transition here and do something that's a little bit more forward looking. And I'm going to give you kind of a pretty open question. So do with it what you will. But when you look at the organization and you're starting to scale internationally and so forth, how do you define success as an organization? What does that mean for you?
I don't want to sound like a romantic here. I don't, well, whilst financial metrics is always going to be important, right?
Sure.
I've the last time I had an honest conversation with somebody, I said, imagine the value of us being able to achieve our hypothesis with 1 million companies.
Mm.
And our core market is 1,000 man and above, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we eventually get to serve 1,000 people in 1 million companies, that's about 50% of the workforce that you're working with, right? Mm-hmm. And that to me is success, right? That to me, and again, that translates to a lagging indicator of, yeah, sure, financially we're doing amazingly well. But that impact to me is where we want to really strive, right? Okay. Every time I say this, investors go, okay, what does that number translate to? Right?
Investors are investors after all. Give me the bottom line.
And we have that number, right? So to me, really, I think the biggest metric for success to me is when people look at what we do and they don't look at it as a HR technology, they look at it as work technology. I think the last statistic is about 2.5 billion people are working, right? And if I now can impact that many people, then it's really interesting, right? So at the back of our mind, we've always had this Tableau model. So Tableau used to only sell to CTOs and CIOs of the organization. Yep. And they figured out how to get into selling to managers, right? And whilst we're not trying to replicate that, they've broken that barrier between, hey, here's a BI tool to here's how you understand anything, right? And that's really what we are trying to aim for. This is not for me, and I don't know if you can see this.
Yeah. People.
So it always says people technology at work, not HR technology, right? Yeah. So that's always the aim, and that's what we want to be able to do. So in the back of my mind, that's success. Yeah. And if you get to do that, then all the financial models come together.
Yeah. Very cool. Very cool. This has been fantastic. Let me wrap up with my standard closing questions here. And the first one is, what is a tech tool that you just cannot live without?
I honestly am not the most tech person. But I always say WhatsApp. My team hates this. My team hates this. We've got Slack, we've got Jira, we've got Confluence, we've got
and you're stuck in WhatsApp.
Because to me, a decision made quickly is a decision executed quickly.
Yeah.
So I go back to the basics. Whilst processes and all, the Venn diagram of people, tech, and process. So I always say tech enables people and process, right? Don't let tech drive anything.
Yeah. Okay.
If decisions need to be made, then I go back to what, but my team will say Confluence.
Yeah. Okay. Very cool. Last question here is, if you were to talk to another startup founder that's just getting going, what would be the biggest piece of advice that you could offer?
I will share the best piece of advice I got. And I got this from a gentleman called Venugopal. He's the founder construction company, so it's a very traditional business. But he's an engineer by profession. Built Jalil, built the first LRT and all that. He has a construction firm. So he was actually my very, very first client back in 2007, 2008, for 2,500 ringgit. And he spoke about entrepreneurship in a way that stuck with me, right? He said, do this if the pain it's going to cost you. Sorry, if you love what you do more than the pain it's ever going to cost you.
Yeah. I think that's a very good point, because building a startup is incredibly hard. You're gonna have to go through a lot. I mean, the stress, all the burdens are sitting on top of your shoulders. If you can, if it's worth it, you'll be able to power through it. Yeah.
Right. So whilst I don't believe in this follow your passion, because my passion was football and cars. If I followed that, I wouldn't be here. But when you find something meaningful and you're willing to really push through that process, then it becomes interesting. Then it becomes exciting, right? And I say now, after COVID, you can't shake my will, and I know very, very clearly this is what I want to do. Right. That 2 years really tested me as an entrepreneur. Right. Coming on the other side of it, I know now you can say whatever you want. I know this is what I want to do.
I absolutely love that piece of advice. Sharma, this has been a really, really interesting conversation. I really appreciate you coming out and sharing your journey with us.
Thank you. I hope it was worth anyone's time one day.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. All right, that wraps it up for another fantastic episode of the Sea of Startups. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. Go on to iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a review. It's the best way for us to get discovered and to have these startup stories reach a broader audience. If you have any suggestions or would like to get in touch, you can email me at kevin@indelible.vc. As always, I'm your host, Kevin Brocklin from Indelible Ventures, and this is the Sea of Startups.